Glad you're here this morning. Thanks for those joining us online. If you're here and you're a guest, do not judge our church on me this morning. Okay? Make sure you come back when Pastor Tim is here. Now, you'll be blessed by that. It's awesome to be on a team with Pastor Tim, Pastor John, and their families. I am thrilled to be here. We got here in May in the middle of the lockdown. We moved over. Somebody asked how that went. I felt like a criminal driving my moving truck across the state, wondering if I'm going to get pulled over for being out in public. And I'm like, I have to move. It's not my fault, all right? And you mentioned earlier, like, man, maybe this afternoon you could find a quiet place in his house. I'm like, I got kids. If you have kids, you know that doesn't exist. There is no such thing as a quiet place in your home. It just doesn't happen. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love my children. So if you've gotten to meet them, Nate turned 6 on Friday. Now he's adjusting to telling people how old he is using 2 hands now. He used to be, how old are you? 5. The other day somebody asked him, how old are you? He said, 6? So I was proud of him. He did a great job. He got it. So I was like, I would help you, buddy, but I struggle with numbers too. So good luck on that one. No, we're thankful for his mother at that point. And but I'm thankful you're here this morning. We're being in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. We're going to read just a few verses by way of introduction. And then we'll dive into the message this morning. Hopefully something that'll help you out, something I always need, something that I struggle with. And perhaps you'll be with me and you'll see that when we get to it as well. So we're going to read a few verses here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. It says, but, in verse 7, we were gentle among you, even as a nurse cherisheth her children. So, being affectionately desirous of you, we were willing to have imparted unto you, not the gospel only, but also our own souls, because ye were dear unto us. I lived in California during my college, and then I was a manager at a Lowe's store there in Palmdale, California. I was out there about 5 years. And when I left Lowe's, I had to obviously cut ties with everything Lowe's related. I had some money in a 401k that was a company-sponsored plan that when I was leaving, I had 2 choices. One was to take a disbursement and take a huge penalty because it was an early disbursement. Perhaps you've been faced with the same type of thing. Or I could get a disbursement check and just reinvest it myself and pay no tax penalty as long as it was reinvested within 30 days. I have no stock market experience or anything. I'm a college kid, just graduated, but I was like, why not? Let's give it a shot. So I took the check, I opened an E-Trade account and stuck it in there, and I was like, here we go. And I made some good trades and some bad ones, okay? And so I learned a whole lot real quick. Now, if you've done anything stock-related, you know that there is a huge learning curve to what you do with investing. And, I'm not here to give you financial investment advice this morning. You can call just about anybody and they'll get it. Some people have that uncle in the family that'll tell you the new latest stock you got to get in on. And, I'm not that guy this morning. But I do want to give you some investing advice. And I believe we find it here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. But it's not how to invest your money. It's not how to move around your stocks and your funds and things to get the greatest return. I want to talk to you about investing in people this morning. How do we make an investment in people? Because all of us, whether we have stock market experience or not, I believe have a responsibility to invest in people. You have a different sphere of influence than I do. You have different people that you invest in than I will. And yet you are still, I believe, required to make some investments. And I'm thankful as a Christian that I don't have to approach investing in people the same way as a young man I had to approach the stock market, which was blindly with no instruction or just hoping to find an answer somewhere. We've been given a manual and a playbook of how to invest in people. It's the Bible. Just in case you were wondering what I was talking about. It is the Bible, all right? And in 1 Thessalonians 2, I believe we see a playbook, a simple checklist of things that we need present in our life or steps that we need to take to make the greatest investment and see the greatest return from people's lives. And that's what I want to cover this morning for just a few minutes. We're going to pray and ask God to help us this morning because I'm preaching, all right? Let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much for your word. Lord, you don't need me, but this morning I pray that you would use me. I pray as we look in 1 Thessalonians and we see the heart of the Apostle Paul, that we might also have those same character qualities in our own lives, that you would use us as you desire to, and that we would be usable for you, that as we take just a few moments this morning, you would speak to hearts, you'd move me out of the way, that you would speak through your word directly into the hearts of your people this morning. I thank you that they took the time and made the effort to be here, and I pray they would leave knowing that they got something from your word today. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, I will do my best to slow down how fast I talk. You may have picked up, if you've known me for any amount of time, I talk very fast. And some people say, you need to slow down, you talk too fast. And I try, but then I start overthinking how slow I'm talking. And I get all messed up and flustered, and then I get talking faster. But here's the good news. If I talk fast this morning, and you listen fast this morning, in theory, we will be done fast this morning. Right? And everyone's like, that sounds great. Okay? And, I appreciate this morning. Pastor John has so many talents and abilities. See him up here leading worship, and he went into some announcements. But he let out, he was like, it's a perfect fall day outside. And there were some chuckles, right? Because we're like, what's your description of perfect fall morning? It differs from mine, sir. And he was like, you know what? This is one of those mornings you just feel like you just need to stay home and go to sleep. I'm like, don't tell the 8:30 service that before I get up to preach. Like, I don't want them to, I should have stayed asleep. Like, don't do that to me this morning, please, all right? So you try to stay awake. I'll do my best to stay awake myself, and we're going to be good this morning, all right? I'm excited about what God has for us, I believe. I think it's going to help you. I know it helped me, okay? And something I have to work with as well is how do I invest in people? Because it's not something that just happens naturally. It really isn't. We need God's help to do it. And I think there's 3 things that I want to give you very quickly this morning that we find here in 1 Thessalonians 2 that you're going to need if you're going to invest in people, all right? Let's look at the first one. Number 1, look at verse number 7 and 8 with me. We just read them. I'll read it again. I'm going to highlight a few words as we go through them. It says, but we were gentle among you, even as a nurse cherishes her children. So, being affectionately desirous of you, we were willing to have imparted unto you, not the gospel of God only, but also our own souls, because you were dear unto us. You see a lot of terms of affection here. You see a lot of what we could almost call emotional terms. Affectionate, gentle, you're dear to me, I cherish you. Terms that we would see that have a real relation to our attitude about people. And I think if we're going to invest in people properly, I think we're going to have some empathy in our lives. So first thing we're going to need is empathy. This is not your prototypical term. More than likely, you did not text this in a message yesterday, the word empathy. It's not a word we use often. Here's a simple, easy definition I heard once that really made sense to me. Your hurt in my heart. That's the idea of empathy. Sympathy, we say, well, have sympathy on somebody. That just means that I know you're having a problem, and I can appreciate that. I know you're having a bad day, and I'm sympathetic to that. You had a rough day at work? Okay, I got that. Empathy is a little farther than that. Empathy is not just me knowing you're hurting, it's almost hurting with you. It's the idea of empathy. And he uses the illustration of a nurse. Now, I've had 2 diametrically opposed experiences with nurses, okay? Some of them were extremely gentle. And when they gave you the shot, it was almost like they felt for you as a little kid crying or as the grown adult crying that you were going to get this shot. I don't want it. They're like, man up, right? They're like, okay. But they were so gentle. And he says, we were like a nurse. We're gentle, and like we cherisheth her children. On the other side, I've had nurses who were not so gentle. And you're like, that's not very nice. It's my mom. My mom's a nurse, okay? And growing up, she was not the most gentle nurse to us, okay? And there were 4 of us boys, and we were constantly getting hurt. And maybe you have children, you're like, that's my life, okay? So I can appreciate now with children how sometimes there were some days she was just not as gentle as others, okay? I appreciate that now. It's like, grow up. Mom, I broke my leg. Walk it off. Like, what? Like, they were like, Mom, where's your empathy for me here? Don't you feel my hurt? Okay? But Paul was saying, look, we were gentle, just like a nurse who cherished her children. And what I picture is like the day that I got to hold my son for the first time. I don't know if any dads are with me here. I was petrified that I was going to break him on some level. They were like, here, you would like to hold him? I'm like, I really want to, but and like you're hesitant, like so gentle, like, oh, and I'm holding him, and he'd go to stretch, and I'm like, no, don't fall. Hey, and I'm like, oh, and like they're like, here, put him in this onesie. And so I'm like just barely pulling his arm and trying to think. Nurse is like, that's not how you do it. And they're like, whoop, 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 whoop. I'm like, no! Like, I was so gentle because I knew my strength and I knew I didn't want to hurt him because he was so fragile. I think that applies here. Paul was writing to people who, if you will, were maybe fragile in their Christian life. And he said, I don't want to just approach you maybe the same way that I would approach somebody else who is as mature in their Christian life as me. I want to be gentle. I want to have empathy to understand that you're going to struggle and hurt in areas that I've already got. I'm succeeding there. But I want to have that gentleness to approach you that way. And there's two aspects to empathy that are important. Number one is your attitude. Number one is our attitude. And if I think we were all being honest today, we all struggle with our attitude. And it doesn't take much to see in society today, an attitude of empathy is not evident. You pull up your social media feed, I don't care which social media feed you have, you look on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever it is, there is not a whole lot of, oh, I feel for you on there right now, okay? There's a whole lot of, you're an idiot on there right now. That's what's on there. And Christians, we should be different about that. We really should. Our attitude should not be that. Look at the words that he uses. I highlighted them a minute ago, right? The word gentle. This speaks of mild, meek, or soft. The word cherish means to treat with tenderness and affection, to give warmth, ease, or comfort to. Affectionate, having great love or affection or fond. The term dear means of a high value and estimation, greatly valued, beloved, and precious. And that term dear, I think, is very important. Because it says of a high value in estimation. Here's the idea. There are some things that are dear to you that I could care less about. Does that make sense? There are things that are dear to me that you're like, why is that dear to you? Perhaps it's some type of a family heirloom. You're like, that's trash. Like, you don't appreciate what this is. I'll tell you what it is. And you're like, okay, fine. And maybe you don't understand it. And yet you can still have a good attitude towards it. Does that make sense? There might be things that are very important to you, and I'm like, okay. I deal with this with the teenagers sometimes. I'm like, what? I don't understand why that's important at all. But I'm going to have a hard time investing in them and reaching them if I actually approach them that way. Be like, everything you care about is unimportant. You need to make sure everything I care about is important. Paul's like, that's not the way I'm approaching you. He said, my attitude is that you are dear to me. I cherish you. I want to be affectionate to you. I want to be gentle to you. And he had that approach to them, which I think shows why Paul was able to impact so many people in so many places. His attitude was one of, I want to have empathy towards you. I may not even fully get it, but I love you. And if we as a church have that attitude, I think you would see just awesome things here. And you know what I've kind of picked up on? I think we have that. I have seen that. I pray that we keep that, because it can be easy to lose that over disagreements, over a difference of opinion, over why I wish they wouldn't have 3 services, I want to. Why I wish these chairs were farther apart. I wish they were closer together. I wish we had pews. It could be over some simple, weird things sometimes that you see these attitudes creep in, right? Unless I'm the only one that's ever seen it, but I don't think I am. So let's make sure that we have the attitude here of Paul, which I believe is the attitude of Jesus Christ himself. One of being gentle and caring about other people. But also, I believe it then goes to our actions. It's not just about our attitude. It's also about the way that we do and approach things with other people that show that we have a spirit of empathy. The way that he even says it in there, he's like, man, the way that I was affectionate and desirous of you, I would have imparted or given unto you even my own soul. What he was saying was like, man, I love and care about you so much. I just want to do things for you. I want to give things to you. I want to be there with you. This was his attitude. And I think this would be a good thing for us as Christians to have present in our life, as us as a church to be known for. Man, you go there, you don't have to look like them. You don't have to completely agree with them, be like them. They will love you. That's a great thing to be accused of, isn't it? Well, I think we should be accused of that. That would be awesome. And Paul, you think about it, if he was willing to truly give his own soul, you think he would have struggled to give something a little smaller? I don't think so. If the guy was like, can you just give me a couple minutes? I really need somebody to talk to. It's just going to be complaining again. No. I don't think that would have been Paul's attitude. I think he would have been like, okay, I'm here for you. If he says, I'll give you my own soul. I'm really struggling right now. Hey, don't talk to me about that. When you need my soul, come back and see me and I'll give it to you. I don't think that was probably the way Paul would approach it, right? His actions would have been impacted by his attitude there. He's like, I love you, I care about you, I cherish you. So if you need me, here I am. If you need something, you come see me. And I have witnessed this time and again in the lives of Christians, and it is so refreshing when you see it. It truly is. If you've been impacted by somebody like this, you just know, oh, they're a giver. I've been amazed, and I've loved seeing this in the lives of teenagers at different times. Because the truth is, teenagers, especially in today's society, can get a bad rap. Like, oh, they're so selfish, it's all about them, it's a me, me, me culture. I'll tell you this, teenagers are some of the most generous people I've ever met. I remember I was doing a special program in Ludington for my youth group, and I was going to be ordering everybody their own little New Testaments. And they were really nice leather-bound New Testaments. I was going to get them for about $7 a piece, and I had people sign up, and I want to say we had 6 people or 7 people sign up. All in all, with shipping, it was going to be like $60 to get these New Testaments in, and I was so excited, and they were excited. And I remember I was in my office. I want to say it was on Monday, possibly Tuesday, somewhere in the beginning of the week after our youth group on Sunday, and a teenage guy came in. I think he was a junior in high school. And he asked me, hey, how much is it going to cost for all those New Testaments? It'll probably be like $60. And I remember pulling 3 $20 bills out of his wallet and putting it on my desk. And he says, just don't tell anybody who paid for them. That was so cool. But to me, it was this idea of a young man even getting it. Having an attitude of wanting to invest in other people, but then doing something with that too. And it was so refreshing to see that. It really does. When I say it gives you a good viewpoint on humanity at that point, right? And it was so great to see that his actions were one of wanting to invest because he cared about other people. We invest by our empathy. Second thing we can invest with. We invest by our encouragement. I think we should be known as encouragers. People get enough things in life to be discouraged about, right? Well, let's not let us be one of those things. On my way driving in this morning, I got a text message, and I literally laughed out loud when I read it. You ever got one of those texts? Somebody just hit you as funny? All right, we always say LOL, but do we really laugh out loud? I did this morning on the way into church. And I got a text from somebody who knew I was preaching this morning. They said, hey, I'm not going to be there this morning. I just got called to Traverse City for work. Just wanted you to know that I'm praying for you. Bring the thunder, brother. And I couldn't help it because I read that in the voice of Hulk Hogan. And if you know who that is, brother, like I read it that way and just started laughing in my car. I'm like, that is fantastic. And I was thinking about it. I was like, how appropriate on a Sunday morning where I'm about to preach on being an encouragement to other people, I get sent an encouraging message from somebody. And I want to ask you, what did it truly cost him to type up those 4 lines in a message? 15, 20 seconds of his day, maybe? And I tell you, it encouraged me this morning. I was getting ready to preach on being an encouragement. I was like, wow, how appropriate. Thanks, God. Those things right there. So I would challenge you this week. What could you do with 15 to 20 seconds of your day to impact somebody's life and be an encourager? It really doesn't take that much. And sometimes we're like, I just don't have time. We have time for what is important to us. You have 24 hours and 7 days this week. I also do. We might spend it differently, but we have the same amount of time. So what you have time for is what is going to be important to you. I would encourage you to put some encouragement in those hours this week. Look at the words he uses as he's writing again. Look down at verse number 11. Let's look at verse number 11 there in 1 Timothy chapter 2. He says these words. He says, as ye know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you, as a father doth his children. Can I tell you, there are some days I am not as much of an encouragement to my son as I should be. And if you're here and you're a parent, we could sheepishly put our hands up together probably on that. When he was first born, I'd give him everything, right? You cry, I'm there. You got a problem? Here I am. You got an issue? Talk to daddy. Like here it is. And then some days I'm like, why? Why are you the way you are? And as parents, we probably all ask that question. Be like, where does it come from? It's your mother. Where? No, I wasn't saying that was me. I was saying that was you. I love you, babe. But here's the thing. We can sometimes lose that ability to encourage around because what we do is we focus on the negative. We're like, ugh, and we lose all the positive. Sometimes I'm quick to jump on something he does wrong, but I skip right over the 17 things that he did right. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go after the youth group and be like, I can't, you guys are all messing this up, and skip over all the things they've done right and encourage them there. I think here he's using these words. He uses the word exhort. This means to incite by words or advice. And not inciting as like a riot, okay? He's not talking about doing that. We have plenty of people doing that today, okay? He says to incite by words or advice. Here's the idea, to light a fire under. You want to motivate somebody to keep doing well that's a worker for you? Compliment them on how well they're doing because they're going to want to keep doing well. You want to get that young person to keep making good steps? Tell him how proud of you are of all the good steps he's done and watch how he keeps trying to please you. We have a natural tendency as humans to want to please those in authority over us. It's generally inherent in most people. Well, if we try to encourage that, we will see that magnified as well. He uses the term exhort. He uses the term comfort. This is to strengthen, invigorate, to cheer, or enliven. Hey, you're doing awesome. Keep going. Hey, I know you've been struggling lately, so I'm so proud of you. Hey, maybe this is somebody else in the room. I noticed you weren't here for a couple weeks because you were really struggling with some things. I'm so proud of you for being back at church. And throwing that encouragement in there. Can I tell you this? You don't just have to encourage, you encourage your pastors very much. This month is Pastor Appreciation Month. I've gotten some very encouraging cards and gifts this month. Those things encourage. They really do. Maybe your spouse needs an extra word of encouragement this week. Maybe they're struggling at work. Maybe they're struggling with something, and you can slip them a little note that just says, hey, I love you. You're doing awesome. We have a world that loves to discourage. And if you look at news for any amount of time, you're going to be discouraged, okay? Let's be encouragers. Let's just have a heart to encourage. He uses those terms. Sam Walton understood this. You may recognize the name. He was the founder of a small department store chain called Walmart, okay? Sam Walton was quoted as saying this: nothing else can quite substitute for a few well-chosen, well-timed, sincere words of praise. They are absolutely free, but worth a fortune. And it's very true. And I mentioned the text message I got this morning. Sometimes those free words of encouragement mean everything. So this week, may we be encouragers as well. Maybe you can write a note to somebody. Maybe you can send a simple text message, send an email. Something simple that way. Doesn't take much, and doesn't cost much, but it can truly make a big impact. So we invest in people by our empathy, truly having a heart for people, by encouraging, taking the step to actually doing something with that more than just feeling it, putting effort into it. And thirdly, I believe we invest by our example. Look at the way that Paul says it in verse number 10. He says it this way: you're witnesses. In other words, you've watched, you've seen, and God also has seen it, how holily and justly and unblameably we behaved ourselves among you that believe. So he says, hey, you were witnesses to even how we handled ourselves, about how we lived our lives. He's like, I'm not just talking the talk. You guys all saw how I lived. I've lived this. I'm not trying to tell you to do something I haven't done and to be something I won't be. He's like, you witnessed how this happened, how when I was investing in you. We invest in people by our example. The words he uses the word holy. We understand this speaks to of with sanctity or sanctification. Not trying to encourage somebody to live Christ-like if I am not living Christ-like. Be like, hey, you follow Christ as I'm following Christ, is the attitude Paul is sharing here. The term justly means honestly, fairly, with integrity. Most of you have heard, probably all of you have heard the term life isn't fair. We may have even used that. Parents are great for this one, all right? Deal with it. Life's not fair. However, life may not be fair, But Christians are not able to use that as an excuse to not be. Okay? Life is not fair. We should be. Justly. That's what it speaks to. Justice. Speaks to honestly, fairly, with integrity. And this is not just like a New Testament thing. You read in Micah, I think it's 6 verse 8, right? He says, He has shown you what is good, O man. What doth the Lord require of thee but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. He's like, accomplish those things, and you'll be amazed at all the other things that you do right. And here he talks about justly. He's like, I did my best to be fair. I tried to make sure that everything was even as much as I could. So let's not use the excuse of the world, oh, life's just not fair, deal with it. We should still strive to be. We should try to be holy, justly, unblameably, he says, which is in such a manner as to incur no blame. And in Philippians, he gives two real quick keys to that in Philippians 2. Verse 14, he says, do all things without, and he names two things, murmurings and disputings. Murmuring is this idea. You tell your son to go clean his room. And he goes to clean his room. But as he's walking that way, you hear, my stupid room, I don't want to go to my room. Am I the only one that's ever witnessed a child murmuring? Okay? Murmuring. Am I the only one who's ever been guilty of murmuring? This is so dumb, I don't want to do this, so stupid, I'm going to do it. We've probably all done it at some point. And he says, if you really want to be who you're supposed to be, do what you're supposed to do, but don't murmur while you do it. The idea, I'm obeying, but are you honoring? I can do what God tells me to do, but have a bad attitude with it. And just as I don't appreciate my son murmuring as I tell him to do something, how much more does my Heavenly Father not want to hear me murmur as I do what he tells me to do? Well, God, it's rainy outside. I'll go to church, but this is so dumb. I should stay home. Well, God, they don't like me there anyway. I don't even know anybody, but I guess I'll go. And God's like, what in the world? And we murmur, right? We can do that. We're doing what we're supposed to do, but we're murmuring while we do it. Disputings. This is just flat out arguing, right? It's no longer a murmur. I'm just arguing with you. He's like, hey, do what you're supposed to do, but don't do it with those two things. He says in the next verse, the reason why is that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation. Hello, today's society. Among whom ye shine as lights in the world, he says. He says, you really want to point people to God? Do what you're supposed to do, live the right example, and don't be a jerk while you do it. I know I'm paraphrasing, but basically that's what he's saying, okay? Can we all agree that's pretty much what we got written here? Okay? And he says, you guys are witnesses. You saw in my life how I did my best to be blameless, to be just, to live sanctified, because I wanted to invest in your life. And with those three things, having empathy, a heart for people, being an encourager, hey, not being discouraging, by being the right example, I believe we can make a great investment in the life of others. Now, if I were to throw in a bonus fourth point for you, that would be in here. I think you could see that very simply in verse 9, that it's going to take some effort. I can do that because it starts with E as well. Okay? As long as it's alliterated, you can throw as many points as you want. I read that in a book somewhere. But it says, ye remember, brethren, our labor and travail, for laboring night and day, because we would not be chargeable unto any of you, we preached unto you the gospel of God. Paul says, I did all these things, and it was hard work, but I did it because I wanted to make sure all of you understood and received and accepted the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as Christians, is that not what we are called to do? To share the gospel with other people? And what he's saying is that it's not easy. It's going to take some hard work. It says, but you guys were witnesses that I did everything I could to the best of my ability, and I did it night and day tirelessly because I knew I only have one life to live, and I want to invest in you while I can. And if we adopt that attitude, the question becomes, just how great can our return be on investment? I believe if we invest in people and we let them accept Jesus Christ as their Savior because they hear the gospel and understand, wow, Jesus died on the cross for me, I'm unlovable. But Jesus went to the cross willingly to pay for my sin. And I have no other option for heaven other than to accept Jesus Christ as my Savior. And these Christians don't even know me either, but that's church. They loved me and accepted me. They understood that I have my faults and my failures, and they still love and reach out to me. That's different, and I want that in my life. And we see people accept Jesus Christ. Boom, eternal return, that dividend paying for eternity. And then understanding with other Christians, we can be encouraging as well. And then they might reach somebody else, or that next generation that we're investing in, and then we see them live their life for Christ. Boom, eternal dividends, return on investment. I have been blessed and honored in my life to have had many, many people invest in me. I am not self-made, and none of us are, right? But I know in my Christian life, I had many people invest in me. The year was 2002, which if I said in the youth group, I would be considered an antique. I mentioned Y2K the other day, and none of them knew what I was talking about. And it made me kind of sad, and I think I picked up some more gray hairs when it happened, right? But 2002, I was a sophomore in high school, and I went to a small Christian school in Adrian, Michigan, and we had a typing class, and we had no teacher for it. And I'll tell you this, with the way my friends and I were in our class, we were not your class that everybody would probably be chomping at the bit to teach. We were that extra class of boys, okay? And our school secretary, Debbie King, decided, I will teach that class. And we didn't really know Mrs. King personally. We saw her a lot when we would get sent to the office. But we never really spent too much time with her. We just passed her on the way to the principal, right? So she became our typing teacher. And as every typical class of high school boys will do, we pushed and we prodded and we tested. We were going to find the breaking point, and we never did. Mrs. King was tough. I'll tell you this, Mrs. King was fair. Mrs. King loved us, and she said so, which was uncommon to have expressed to our class. Not because the teachers we had were bad, it was just uncommon to have that expressed, that she loved us and wanted us to succeed. And Mrs. King developed a deep relationship with my class. There was myself, my friend Robert, Mark, John, Cody. With our class, she developed a bond with us that year as our typing teacher. Fast forward to my senior year. She's no longer my typing teacher, but she's still the school secretary. And we remember one day that Mrs. King wasn't in the office, which was uncommon because Mrs. King was always in the office. You'd walk in and she'd smile and wave to you on the way by. I could still see her with her curly hair and her glasses just sitting at her desk. And she wasn't there. We got the news a few days later that she had received results from a doctor that said that she had cancer. And Mrs. King still would try to come into school, and she would try to help out in the office, and you could tell she was weak as she was going through her chemo and her radiation. She began to lose her hair, so she got a wig. But she would always still try to smile and encourage you when you came in that day. She would still try. But then came the point where Mrs. King was no longer able to work in the office. She was just too weak and too sick. So Mrs. King no longer served in the office. However, on Wednesdays, I had really been trying to help serve on a bus route that our church would run before Wednesday night church, but because my parents lived so far from the church property, they weren't able to pick me up from school, run me home, bring me back, come back, and then come to church that night. It was just too much running. So Mrs. King volunteered and said, well, if Nathan would like to come to my house, he can come over, he can practice his piano on my piano, and then I'll make sure he gets back to the church so he can serve on the bus route. And I remember doing that on Wednesday afternoons for months. And I felt bad for her because I'm like, I was not good, right? There were a lot of mistakes made on that piano. But graciously would let me come and practice on that piano, and then I would serve on the bus route. I remember as we got down towards the end of my senior year, I played an offertory at church on a Wednesday night, and I butchered the thing brutally. It was ugly, right? Like, it was a train wreck through and through. And I remember the next day, I got one of these. These were in the pews at Berean Baptist Church. And just as on there, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver. And they had these in the pews for you to try to write an encouraging note to somebody. I remember getting this on March 14th of 2004. I wrote the date on it. It just says this, Nathan, it was great to see you playing the piano for a congregational hymn tonight. I remember when you first started playing and did not want to play in church. I'm so glad you are using your talents for the Lord. God bless you. I love you. Mrs. King. I remember getting this note because I was so frustrated after bombing that offertory. I'm like, I'm not playing in church ever again. Not going to do it. And I remember getting that note. and realizing, wow, okay, I'm going to give it another shot. And I'm thankful I did. Thankful I stuck with it because I use it all the time now. But I remember getting towards my graduation, Mrs. King was hardly ever at church anymore. Her diagnosis had pretty much gotten to the point where they knew she wasn't going to make it. So we didn't really get to see her. But I remember at my graduation, my friends and I come walking in. We got our caps and gowns on. We're walking down the aisle. And we look up, and Mrs. King walks in to my graduation. And I found out later, talking to her husband, that she was violently sick that day. She had been throwing up all day. But she said, I am going to those boys' graduation. And she did. A few months later, Mrs. King passed away. I couldn't find the picture. I looked in my storage unit, but I have a picture of her at my graduation that I took with her. And I remember being approached by her husband, and he said, my wife's one request for her funeral was that you and the other boys in her typing class carry her casket. That was her one request. And I keep this note. This was the only note that was on my desk in Ludington under the glass on my desk, because it reminds me that though I may not have stock market experience, though I may not work for a Charles Schwab, while I may not be an investment broker, I can invest in somebody. Mrs. King invested in me. She impacted my life. And so I would ask you, who are you impacting? Are you investing in someone? Perhaps there's that sophomore in high school who's a little rough around the edges. The guy who's frustrated because he can't play the piano without screwing up every time. I'd like to think that if Mrs. King was alive today, she'd be glad she made that investment. And I believe someday in heaven, I'm going to get the opportunity to go up and personally say thank you for that investment. But while I'm still alive and I still have my breath, I want to invest in somebody. It's going to take empathy. Maybe I don't understand everything about it, but I can still feel for them. And I can encourage them, because maybe they're just having a really rough day. And I can encourage them. And I can just be the right example and try to say, hey, I don't got it all figured out. You follow me as I follow Christ. And maybe you can just simply write a note this week. You may not know that some kid someday stands up in front of a church, says, you know what? He or she didn't even realize just how much of an impact they were making on my life, but they wrote me this note one time. This thing survived almost 17 years. Can I tell you, every day that I see this note, it impacts me again. So I pray that you have an impact investing in people that pays dividends for years and years and also into eternity. We're going to have a word of prayer. I'm going to ask you to bow your head, close your eyes. Let's go ahead and stand together. You listened so well today. I want to say thank you for that. God, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the truth we see here in the book of Thessalonians. From the Apostle Paul, who, Lord, of all his faults and all the areas he struggled, just said, I'm trying to do my best. I love you guys. Keep going and doing well. And that encouragement that he shared so many years ago encourages us today. And Lord, I pray that as we move into this week, as we live in a day and age where discouragement is right and left, where anger and animosity is the norm, we'd be just a little different. Lord, we'd be that salt and light that we're called to be. Lord, I thank you first and foremost for the example of Jesus Christ, who understood our situation, who had a heart for us, who was moved with compassion and came and gave his life on that cross so that anybody who would place their faith and trust in him alone could have their sins forgiven and an eternal home in heaven promised to them. Perhaps this morning, our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed, perhaps you're here and you say, you know what, I don't even know that I've ever started a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Today could be that day for you. Just as simply as there in your seat praying and saying, Lord, thank you so much for loving me, understanding my situation, and coming and dying on that cross and offering me that gift of salvation. Perhaps today is that day for you. You're here for the first time, you say, that doesn't make any sense. Would you give us an opportunity to explain it to you about how Jesus has impacted our life, changed our destiny? Perhaps you're here and you're a Christian who just says, you know what, I've been maybe a little more focused on me lately and not really focused on others. My hand would be raised with you. And I believe if we could see in heaven, we'd see Mrs. King and countless others encouraging us to keep going, encouraging us maybe to get back on track. Maybe you're watching online and this is an encouragement to you as well. I pray that this week we would take a moment to truly live for somebody else. I'd like to give you just a few seconds this morning to pray right there in your spot, perhaps online. Bow your head and say a prayer. Maybe it's accepting Jesus into your heart. That can happen for you today. Perhaps it's just kind of recalibrating a little bit this morning and desiring to make a positive investment in the lives of others. Whatever it would be for you, I want to take just a few moments, spend a couple seconds there with God in your heart.